Thanks for joining us for this interview spotlight at the Global SCM Leaders Conference here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Greg Thompson, and speaking now with Jake Barr. And Jake was one of the keynote presenters here at the conference today. And Jake, you led off by talking about the perfect storm. So tell us, we heard a lot about different perfect storms at different times. There was one with the economy. What is the perfect storm that you were describing?
Yeah, the perfect storm that we were describing is really a set of business conditions that have emerged over the last 3 to 5 years, which are resulting in a dynamic that makes it very difficult for a normal business to actually function without trying to step out and do something different. Think of it as if you attempt to do the same things you've done up to this point, you just simply won't deliver success. The elements of it are, of course, the economic situation, but it's exacerbated by things like the continuing high price of fuel oil, energy cost, the shortage of skilled labor. And when you compact those together with shortening cycles of how people need to bring things to market and successfully drive an exceptional rate of return out of their investment and their money, it's just become a very difficult business environment. So when we talk about the perfect storm, we're talking about all these elements are now coming to rest in the business community, but unfortunately in organizations that were not designed to deal with all of these things hitting them at the same time.
And if you're an organization and if you're not looking forward, if you're looking back, you're looking at old trends, you can really get lost in this thing.
Yes. In fact, if you look at the industry leaders, what they share in common are a couple of very finite characteristics. One, they've all embraced understanding that they cannot simply take their current workforce and have them work any harder. Productivity levels to a great extent are at their all-time highs. So it's not about extending the workday, it's about how to think about taking these environmental factors around them and finding ways to actually allow and unleash the brain power of those that they already have on their staffs. And in many cases, that's involving better analytical tools.
And talk to me a little bit about how you spent many years with Procter & Gamble and now you have your own consultancy business. Tell me a little bit about how you would advise people on how to use those tools.
Well, the first thing we're doing is making sure that they're looking at their total cost picture, because realistically, while the industry uses the word supply chain, it has a very different meaning depending on what industry vertical you're in. In one industry, it can mean simply manufacturing of goods. In another industry, it can mean actually procurement, so purchasing of goods. It can mean manufacturing of goods. It can be actually engineering the processes. And in some, it may also include the final distribution into the channels in which it's sold. But when we're really talking business problems and how to attack looking at how to optimize, we're making sure that people are looking across the full end-to-end. Because realistically, even applying lean principles, if they apply how to try and drive out or reduce cost on one activity, you can literally be shutting down how quickly you can get to market or how quickly you can react if you shut down or try and reduce the wrong piece. And that's why we try and make sure that they do a full mapping of their process in a very quick technique, but importantly, looking at those total costs against their business need, because every company has typically one of 3 distinct needs. They're either first trying to grow their top line, i.e. in many cases expand. It's either expand into new categories, expand into new geographies, in new product lineups. 2, they're addressing a margin issue. They've been a market leader, they're either losing to competition now, their products may be stagnant, they need to refresh their lineup. Or 3, they're cash starved and they're looking to reinvest in the business and trying to find a way to self-fund much of that.
Now, are you finding that, as big data, we talked a lot about that during the conference, and there's a cultural change that has to happen in organizations, and you spoke a little bit about that during your presentation. Talk to me about, the culture change that has to happen in organizations. What can happen if, people embrace the right principles, and what can happen if they don't.
Yeah. Well, I think this is where that perfect storm phenomenon helps, because unfortunately, no company that you go into today actually has, as in measured in months or years, to solve a problem. They actually now either have days or weeks or maybe up to a month or two to really put a plan of attack into place to address a real critical business outage. So that in and of itself is helping people step back culturally and say, I cannot attempt to do it the way that I've done it before. Your point about big data is very relevant as well, because it's turning into a way that I'm finding, call it market laggards. The companies that have been late to the game and trying to either invest in improving their operations are now being able to leapfrog simply because they're involving some others to lift data that they already have. They just haven't had the ability to simply bring it together so that they can make quick business decisions with it. So it's a combination. You can change the culture either organizationally, or you can actually use the environment and what the business issue is.
So the market's really kind of driving this thing, and I think that we live in a society now that everything has to happen in an instant. I know you talked about that a little bit, and Wall Street kind of demands it. People want results, all of that, and I think that you're now seeing it at a granular level happening on the supply chain, and so that's exciting, and at the same time it can be a little bit frightening too.
It's frightening because unfortunately you must then assume that if you're going to actually address it, that you actually have the brain power to do so. So to a certain extent, some firms are waking up to the opportunity, but then opening the cupboard and finding that they may not have the talent that's required, and that's where either consulting firms, small or large, or some of the technology players can actually step in and help to bridge that gap. Realistically, the physics have never changed. You're either moving a good or service to market, you're moving information, or you're moving cash. It's three dynamics. They've never changed really since the Stone Ages. So when you look at how people can step in and start addressing them, the only thing that's changed is how long you have to cycle through.
That's absolutely right. And when you look at the supply chain or transportation in general, if you're standing still, you're going to get run over.
Absolutely, in today's age. But quite frankly, while it's a perfect storm environment, a company that really starts to take an aggressive position and attacking things right now is literally going to ride the top of the wave. And small examples of that. Firms that have for years tried to internally optimize transportation expense now have the opportunity of using some very simple techniques to lift up data and optimize not only using all of their physical movements, but the movements of multiple companies across the industry, allowing them to effectively reduce their overall cost, take it to the bottom line, make higher margins, and then reinvest back in the business. Things that without some of the technology improvements, as little as 5 years ago, simply weren't possible.
And it's all about embracing change and taking advantage of the moment.
It is. And truly, I guess a concluding point I would make for you is that industry laggards don't have to be laggards forever. In fact, the opportunity for them to leapfrog today, as you heard in part of the conference of some of the examples of some of the African nations, they are literally doing generational leapfrogging.
That is, and it's amazing what's happening there, and what could happen here in the North American market too.
More on tap. I expect it to change rapidly in the next 3 years.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation, and Jake Barr, we thank you for joining us here on our SCM Global Conference.